News reports say that in most of South Africa's provinces, there are far more people who receive social grants than earn a salary. And that's a reality that was reflected in the country survey report published last week by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. However, the South African government has been undertaking a cocktail of reforms that have seen a rebound in the country's business confidence, inflation seen below central bank's target, and a steady currency, the rand. But there are still many holes to fill for the continent's most advanced economy. Let's get on the ground. For more on this, as we bring on my guest, Chris Hart, the Executive Chairman at Impact Africa Investment, who is in Cape Town tonight. We thank you for your time. Monday evening on the show as always. Welcome. Thank you.
Good evening.
Thank you. One of South African magazine described the latest OECD report as 10 lost years for South Africa. Do you agree with that news headline?
I think it's probably a little bit more than that, 12 to 15 lost years in a sense. And I think, in terms of economic growth, there's been three shoes to fall that has been quite important. The first was introduction of Black economic empowerment in 2001. The sector charters basically put a big brake on growth because it was effectively prosperous economy needs freedom of association, and that is the antithesis of freedom of association. But in 2007, it was quite a critical change in terms of the rule of law, when the charges were dropped for political reasons against the then incumbent or the president-to-be of the ANC, Jacob Zuma. It's not personal from the point of view of Jacob Zuma, but the point is that at that point, they gave political impunity. And the third shoe to drop really more recently in terms of devastating or going the wrong way was expropriation without compensation, the law that actually was applied this year. And that's going to be a brake on growth. Those particular three factors need to be reversed in South Africa for the actual platform of growth to be improved. And then South Africa also needs to be look at other factors such as labor reform, for instance, and to look at the tax regime, to actually cut the tax regime so that it is more competitive with other countries. We do need to look at that. We need to raise the saving rate, which is it's a long-term policies that need to be put in place. It's the country is not very friendly for saving at the moment. It's not really friendly for investment, and those things need to be changed. I think even more recently, the ruling party seems to be doubling down on destructive policies, which is unfortunate because we've now got a coalition in government. I think it was very positively received. I think it still is positively received in the sense that you should have a plurality of thinking and not just a simple single echo chamber in terms of policy making. But we've seen old policies, legacy policies that were passed in the previous parliament that's been ratified in this parliament, and no real evidence of good cooperation. The budget was an example where there just was no seeing eye to eye, and I think there still is problems in the background as far as the budget is concerned. It's not yet certain that the budget is going to be passed. So yes, we do need reforms, and I think the OECD report was very much, if one read behind it, the ifs and buts. If we get structural reform that is more market friendly, for instance, if we get reforms from the electricity investment point of view, transmission lines and that type of thing. If we have those things, you may well see the South African growth rate rise. And they're not even predicting a stellar performance, really just rising from the doldrums of sub 1% growth to maybe something closer to 2%, but still under the 2% level. South Africa needs much more growth than that. It needs to get to the 4, 5, 6% level, and that requires more investment.
So if you look at some of these suggestions, Of course, you talk about the budget, the latest budget, still in Parliament
Yes.
and all that because of the tax issues. And so the government needs to fix the primary deficit, the public debt rising to roughly 77% of whatever, and growth slowing down. What's some of the suggestions that you think you talked about electricity, we've got to fix that, power. What else can be done from a structural point of view?
With a structural point of view, it's important is that at the moment, the underlying thinking is that you'll drive growth through increasing spending. And we've had that for the last 10 to 15 years, which is where the last decade came. If you spend more, you create more demand, and therefore you get more growth. But the trouble is, in terms of cause and effect, is by driving expenditure, all we've done is driven the debt levels up. The expenditure is not particularly efficient. And so what one needs to look at is to see how can one shift resources back to the private sector rather than toward, because that's again the trend, is that the government has been taking an increasing share, which means you're shifting resources to lower multiply activity rather than higher multiply activity. And of course, there's other problems of exposure. So we've got to actually shift away from what are called expenditure-driven growth, which is really just leading to, in fact, a negative thing because it's leading to higher debt levels, and that's crushing the ability. The fiscal flexibility has disappeared. We need to shift to investment-driven growth, and that means from a budget point of view, you have to cut taxes on wealth, cut taxes on capital, lower the hurdle rate. In other words, cut things like the dividend taxes and that sort of thing. Yes.
Yes, I love that. And let's just move on because of time. High unemployment and lacking opportunities for jobs are two key issues for South Africa. Can the ongoing reforms fix it? The government says it's doing quite a lot of reforms. It's about 70-something%, about 74% of that is complete, about 20% is work in progress.
Yeah, the reforms, unfortunately, are not market friendly. In other words, there are reforms, but it's basically to restrict market access, and that's why we're seeing unemployment being an intractable problem. To solve unemployment, we need to get capital availability to small businesses and actually free up the regulatory space, at least for small businesses, so that small businesses can actually establish and thrive. That is basically a weak end. It really is a weak part of South Africa's economy. We've got a superb corporate sector, which has given the economy capability and capacity, but we don't have a strong SME sector, which is where the heavy lifting comes from a point of view of employment and employment creation. And the availability of capital for small businesses is not easy. It's a very, very difficult market, and of course corruption has led to a trust deficit, which of course trust is an important part of investor confidence, and that is basically we need to get out of our what we call as the lost decade, as it were. We need to get out of that negative vicious cycle and get into a virtuous cycle, and that would require different thinking and basically a reversal of a lot of the policies that have been implemented in the last 10 to 15 years, which is why we sit in the morass that we do. The country has an enormous potential to get out of it, and fairly quickly, if the impediments, which is basically self-inflicted, it's government-driven impediments in the economy, that need to be removed, and we need a government department that help to nurture the SME sector rather than crush it with very, very complicated regulation that really only suit large businesses. The regulatory structures very much requires economies of scale, which is why I think big businesses are not too concerned about it, but it does hit small businesses very, very hard. The expenses that one incurs to set up a business before you've even made a cent of profit is actually quite astronomical, and The tax is extremely unfriendly. The taxes are being extracted out of startups even before they make money, which is also something that needs to be reformed.
So do you think if you put some of these suggestions in place, we can revive South Africa's flagging GDP per capita? When you look at the figures, stagnated roughly over the past 10 years, in which the GDP per person in South Africa remain suboptimal if you look at the rest of the OECD.
Not only is it stagnant and falling, right, it stands out because the rest of the OECD has not seen the same trend. It's not like South Africa can claim that the rest of the world has been in a stagnation and there's not much we can do about it. The problems are very much internally created, which is good news and bad news. If you don't get new thinking, it's bad news. But if you do get new thinking, this is something that can be reversed because it's within our own power and within our own ability to actually reverse, because it was created internally. It can be uncreated as well.
Okay, so do you think we have some good news here, Chris? Inflation is now below the target of 3% set by the Reserve Bank, the SARB, as well as business confidence back stronger. The rand is also healthier, doing around 1,700 to the dollar. Are these good news enough? Are they enough based on the ongoing economic reforms of the government?
Yeah, so those things are good news because effectively it's often said that the exchange rate is like the share price of the country. And that does indicate that there is a stability. South Africa is at least starting to attract capital that's stabilizing the rand, but that is in the short term. We need the longer term reforms, and that includes relaxing things like Black economic empowerment rules, which we mustn't make the mistake of listening to the headline of the public relations side of BEE. It's the actual real regulations that is embodied in them that does the damage, and that is more elite economic empowerment rather than and it's been disempowering for the broad masses of South Africa, because the biggest group that suffers from this is in fact Black South Africans, who form by far the biggest proportion of the unemployed. So it has proved to be policies that have been counterproductive, if I could put it that way, and one needs reform of those policies. A whole heap of things that need to be done, but certainly tax rates need to be lowered, and the reforms, and there does seem to be a lack of market-friendly reforms. There are other reforms, but they're not market-friendly, and we need to actually pay attention to that. The spat with the US, for instance, is not helpful. If we don't get a trade deal with the US, we're going to actually struggle with with whole industries that face existential threats, like the motor vehicle industry, for instance, in South Africa. The assembly can shut down if we don't find it, if we lose that market, from a point of view of exports. And so there are some risks. And I think the OECD does reflect that we've got a resilient financial market, but there are systemic risks that need to be paid attention. And one of them is the government debt that has really risen to too high a level. But they are predicting the potential for some primary surpluses, even if the whole budget is in deficit, but at least that we are in surplus, before interest is charged.
Yeah, it's okay. This is still a work in progress, so we appreciate where things are at the moment. So. Thank you so much. Chris Hart, the Executive Chairman at Impact Africa Investment. We're grateful for your insights as always. Have a pleasant evening in Cape Town.